Yeah, okay. So hey everyone, I'm Danielle Patilli. I'm adult living with spina bifida, and I'm on the SVA Carolinas Advisory Board. Thank you all for being here today to learn about Advocacy 101. To make things go smoothly, if you could please mute yourself until our speaker finishes talking, and Will and Jessica will be monitoring the chat for questions to ask during the end. Um, so I would love to tell you a little bit about and introduce our Advocacy 101 speaker and personal friend of mine. Jim Sliney Jr. is a registered medical assistant and board certified patient advocate. He has worked in numerous parts of healthcare since childhood and has insights in the unmet needs of rare disease and chronic disease patients and disabled people. Jim consulted with students at a level on writing assignments at Columbia University, taught courses in writing, storytelling, public speaking, and legislative advocacy for many years at Patient Rising, where I was lucky enough to be one of his students. And he is absolutely fantastic teacher. He is currently developing learning curricula for nonprofit clients. He's the director of operations at Greater National Advocates. So let's welcome Jim. You ready to start?
Yeah, let's do it. Hi, everybody. So thank you. That was a pretty good introduction. Feel good about that. So let's actually start by talking about that introduction, why it's kind of important. See, when we're performing patient advocacy, it's pretty important that whoever it is that we are talking to, could be a legislator, could be other patients, our peers, could be doctors or at a conference with a mixed group of people. It's important for the people listening to your advocacy to have some idea that you're worth listening to. Now, of course, I believe that all people are worth listening to inherently, but in order to be considered a bit of an expert, you may need to rely on your affiliation with Spina Bifida Association or any other organizations that you belong to, because they bring more credibility to your advocacy. And one big part of advocacy is having credibility when you speak. Um, but we'll loop back around to that in a little bit. I wanted to share just like a really quick story first about one of my early experiences with legislative advocacy, which I haven't been doing all that long. So back in 2023, I went to Capitol Hill with a bunch of other advocates as part of the organization I used to work with, Patients Rising. And our objective was to advocate for certain bills that it was conventionally agreed upon these bills would be helpful to patients, like on an everyday kind of basis. Very fundamental help for patients. Um, and so I took the information that was put together and went to Capitol Hill and started having meetings with congressional offices. Um, I quickly learned, however, that the bills that I was talking about were already very well understood and talked about, and there was kind of a strong opposition to them in many of the congressional offices I went to. I was not prepared for that. Um, so, as you can imagine, you go in there thinking like, hey, I'm going to share a personal story about why this thing is so important, not just to me, but to other people. And the people in the congressional offices were like, we would never support a bill like this. It turns out the details are not that important, but suffice it to say, um, they had identified that a part of this bill would actually hurt people who have who are underinsured. And I didn't know that. I would never support it if I thought that. So I had to pivot in the middle of this meeting. And instead, I started asking questions. Like, tell me what the problem with this bill is. How is it going to actually affect people? Uh, and that went pretty well. Um, I think they appreciated the fact that I was willing to listen and learn, not just come in with preconceived notions and pushing them at people. Um, and then the point of telling this story is that when you're when you're performing legislative advocacy, when you're going to DC and or even in your own state talking to lawmakers, it's not always going to go smoothly. Uh, they may have their heels dug in on certain issues. Um, you may have a really compelling personal story, but it might not make sense, the dollars and cents, um, from a legal perspective. So my point is, it's really good to be well prepared before you go into an environment like that. When I say well prepared, read over the things that you're going to be talking about. Have some conversations with other advocates, your peers, about these issues. And not just rehearse what you have to say, but really talk them out. Because if I had done more of that before talking to congressional representatives, I probably would have realized that there was going to be some opposition and what it might look like. So I was not well prepared. So take it from me, you want to be well prepared. Um, and like I was saying, well prepared can often mean just having a conversation with other people who are stakeholders, people who share an interest in a bill or something like that. Um, because then you can kind of beat out some of the problems before you get into a high pressure environment. And because I've seen people in those high pressure environments kind of crumble under pressure. That could have happened to me too. Um, but I was I was leading a team of other advocates, so there was a lot of pressure on me to keep my cool. Which I don't know. I guess I did. You'll have to ask them. Um, Danielle, did I hold up okay?
Yeah, you did great. Wouldn't have known at all.
Okay, good. Woo, glad to hear that. Um, so think of advocacy as a team sport, which that's the point I was kind of getting around to. Advocacy should never be something you do alone. It's something that's done much better as a team. Um, talk about the issues that concern you. This is both legislative advocacy, that is talking to lawmakers, but also more standard patient advocacy, like when you're speaking to your doctor or you're going to a mixed conference and speaking to some doctors and some patients. Be familiar enough with the topics and some of the tangents that the topics can go off onto so that you're not blindsided, because that can be a little uncomfortable. But it also helps you feel more prepared. It increases your confidence, and people will walk away thinking that you really know what you're talking about, even if you don't. but but you come across that way, and that's really important. Um, so that's kind of talking about an approach to legislative advocacy. But if we go back to the basics here, what is advocacy really about? Why does anyone have to perform advocacy? Well, if we lived in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to fight for the things we need because they would be in abundance and everyone would be able to access them. But obviously, that's not true. Um, we live in a complex system where um, hospitals are complicated, healthcare is complicated, government is complicated, everything is complicated. So it's really easy, especially in a rare disease, for those things that matter to you and others like you, including your family, they get brushed under the carpet. So when that happens, you have to stand up and you have to make some noise. And that's what advocacy is all about. Making noise that people are willing to listen to. Um, Advocacy and activism are kind of close to each other. I guess you could say advocacy is the more polite form of activism. It's more collaborative with the people you're having um, a disagreement with or an argument with. So to keep that pace and that peace in the process, it's important to know a little bit about who you're talking to. Um, and this is one of the fundamental principles of storytelling, which advocacy is really a form of storytelling. You are trying to convince other people of your point of view, and how important whatever the topic of the day is to you and why they should see things your way. To accomplish that, it's important to know who you're talking to. So I've already alluded to there being different types of advocacy, right? There's legislative advocacy, peer advocacy, et cetera, and so on. But each of those audiences requires a somewhat different tone. So when you go to see a lawmaker, you can't talk to them the same way you would talk to a fellow spina bifida patient because you have a connection that the legislator doesn't have. So you would be speaking almost in a different language than they're prepared to understand. So advocacy often involves learning the language or the tone of the people that you're advocating to. Let's use an example. Um, I avoid going to the doctor as much as possible in my life. I guess we all avoid it when we can, but I'm particularly stubborn about it. And when I did finally have to go to the doctor for something serious, I wasn't really prepared to talk about my medical history. I hadn't done it in a long time. I was out of practice. There were lots of things I couldn't remember. If I were a better patient, what I might have done is looked into my family history, um, better understood, uh, like by keeping a list, perhaps of the different medications that I use. Um, or I might even keep a symptom log or a nutrition diary. Why? Because these things are really important data, and doctors think in data. Okay. They're detectives. They collect clues about you and use them to put together a plan of action that hopefully leads to improved health for you. Um, so when you're speaking with a doctor, it's important to be very honest and sincere. You're not really trying to sell something as much as share um, details that are going to benefit you and your doctor as they attempt to do the thing that they do best. So speaking with your doctor has a
No,
very
no,
different,
no.
hey,
Uh,
welcome folks.
mhm,
I'm Jim and I'm just yakking away here.
mhm.
Do you mind if I put you on mute? Is that okay?
No.
All right.
Yes, definitely. Put me on mute.
Actually, I don't know how to do that.
Uh-oh. Okay, I'll put myself on mute.
Okay, thanks. Um, hey, let's use this opportunity actually to pause. Does anybody have any questions about anything that we've covered or even better, questions about things we haven't covered yet? Something that you came here wanting to know that I can help with? No? Okay, that's okay. That just means I'm doing a fantastic job. Um, okay, so back to knowing your audience. um, when I was in DC speaking to lawmakers in that scenario that I explained to you earlier, where things didn't go very smoothly, another thing that I would have done, that I could have done to give myself a better chance at success would be to look up something about the person I was talking to. So if I'm sitting down with Congressional Representative Williams, right? What do I know about Representative Williams that can help me make a connection with that person? Uh, Maybe he's from a military family, or maybe she used to be a pharmacist, right? If you understand even just a little bit about the person that you're going in to converse with, you can create a connection that you might not otherwise be able to connect. I come from a very military family. So if I sat down with Representative Williams and he had a history in the Army or the Marine Corps or something like that, I would definitely use that in conversation to try to bridge the gap between the speaker and the listener. It creates a bond, a connection, a human connection, which is really hard to do in a short amount of time. So you need to have sort of shorthand ways to accomplish that. And so understanding a little bit about them gives you time to do a little research and cater your argument to the world that they know. Okay. So like another example is when you're talking to a legislator, you have to think a little bit about dollars and cents because that's how they think. You also have to think, well, they're here to really make their constituents happy, right? So if you're talking to a congressional representative and you're not from their state, understand a little bit, just a little bit about what's uniquely challenging in that state or congressional district so that you can, again, break the ice, break through and make that human connection. Because people take action based on stories, not on statistics. Um, Statistics don't raise money, they don't change people's minds, but they can start to. It's like an engine that won't start. It's making all the starting noises, but it's not getting there. It's the story that pushes it to its completion. So everything about advocating for yourself, advocating for your community, or advocating for uh, legal change, supporting certain bills. It's all about being able to make a human story out of the thing you're asking for. So how do you do that? Um, if you asked a dozen people, a dozen advocates, how do you really get good at advocacy? You probably get a lot of different answers, but one of the things that you'll have in common is practice. Um, if you're already a member, say, of a support group or a Facebook group, or even have just friends and family that you can speak openly with about your condition, have conversations about it. Danielle and I have fortunately had lots of chats over the time that we've known each other. And so I have a bit of a feel, as does she, for how we think and communicate. So that means we have less work to do if we were to just jump into a conversation right now. We have some things in common. We have a background that we can relate to. So have some of that. But practice your points with friends and peers and colleagues, family members, because they can tell you when you're, what's that phrase? Jumping the shark? Humping the shark? Jumping the shark, I guess.
Jumping the gun, is that?
Maybe jumping the gun. Yeah. What I'm trying to get at, if I remember the phrase, I'll spit it out later. It helps you avoid drawing conclusions that are a little crazy. Because we have a very, every life is a complex web of personal experiences. Um, and the things that matter to me might not matter as much to you. So when I express my concerns about, um, say the current risks to Medicare, Medicaid, there's a decent chance that we have different backgrounds from which these opinions come. Um, so talk them out a little bit with people that you trust so that they can say, hey, that sounds a little inflammatory. You might want to back off on that. And since I'm a writer by trade, if I'm going to do advocacy even in person, like preparing for this talk, I'm occasionally looking over at notes that I made, which, by the way, I'd be happy to share with you afterwards. But they're really just to remind me of the different points that I want to make as I go through this. Um, if you're writing up notes about your advocacy approach, it's okay to use like a chat GPT to say, is this a solid argument? Uh, or how would someone who disagrees with me counter this argument? Um, is it is it biased? Is it unbiased? Would it succeed in a room full of strangers? Um, I'm a big fan of actually using AI for things like this. That's what I think it's especially good at. Um, my brother thinks it's especially good at creating fantasy pictures because he's a big fantasy fan. Um, but I use it instead to help kind of craft arguments and business plans and things like that. But I'm not here to talk about AI. Here to talk about knowing your stuff when you go into an advocacy situation. And again, advocacy situation could be talking with peers, talking with a lawmaker, um, advocating for yourself with your doctor. Okay. Because you are the person who's living in your body, experiencing your life for good and for bad, you are the expert about what your experiences have been. Arguably, you're an expert for your disease community as well, um, especially if you interact with other members of your community in support groups or um, private forums, things like that, where you can hear what other people are experiencing and share your own experiences. Because no one can ever understand how alienating it can be to have a rare disease. And everybody around you seems to be able to just be sick and then get better and go back to work. It's not that way for people with chronic illness and rare disease. So it's really key to be able to share your authentic experience with whoever you're talking to and feel confident in your expertise. There's no um, feeling like your voice doesn't matter, imposter syndrome. No, you are the expert and you have the ability to share the story that could change someone else's life. I I worked at Columbia University for about 15 years, and I did clinical trials there. One of the things I learned in that time, we were doing clinical trials on a condition called hypoparathyroidism, which is when people's parathyroid glands, the little rice-sized things on the back end of your thyroid, don't make enough parathyroid hormone, and therefore the calcium levels in the blood drop. And people have to take a lot of calcium by mouth to try to compensate for it, which comes with its own problems, including kidney stones and all this stuff. Complicated, like any good rare disease, right? I learned a lot from working with that community. I learned about listening more than speaking. Like we would sit down, part of my job was to get updates on people's symptoms and quality of life as we went through the study. The study lasted between 2 and 5 years, depending on which arm people were in. So I got to really know people pretty well. But I learned that sometimes the best way to represent someone is to just give them the floor, let them talk, let them express themselves. And when they're expressing themselves, they're not just sharing their own experiences, they're advocating for what they need to live a better quality of life. And I'm sure every one of you has done this to some extent. Um, you're invited to dinner, but you're just not up for it. Someone says, hey, let's go away for the weekend, and you just don't have the bandwidth. Advocating for yourself is sometimes being honest about your real day-to-day experiences. And the challenge to advocacy in rare disease is getting other people to understand a thing that they could never understand. You could tell me that, using spoon theory, that you can get up, you can take a shower, you can make breakfast, but then you need to lay down for a few hours. To a lot of people, that sounds a little crazy. So part of your challenge in advocating for yourself and advocating for your community is to convey why that is. And the best way to do that is through your own lived experiences. Your own lived experiences. That's really important. Um, Part of what I'm getting at here is listening to what other people have to say. Since advocacy is in itself an argument, what you're really doing is you're offering a counterpoint to a conventional system of beliefs. And we're going to break right now and think about ways that we can do that. And in particular, I want to talk to you about a structure that um, I developed based on old composition um, exercises from middle school and high school. It's called the 4 paragraph argument. And it works kind of like this. We imagine, first of all, that you're writing a letter to a legislator or to a family member. Write to whoever you like. But the formula stays the same regardless of who you're communicating to. Your first paragraph or your first assertion needs to be ethos, establishing your credibility as an advocate. Why should I listen to you? Why should you be listening to me? I tried to kind of incorporate the fact that I've taught writing and taught storytelling so that you know that I'm not just coming off the street. I got a really glowing introduction by Danielle. So if you trust her, maybe I'm getting to borrow a little bit of that trust in me. That's pretty important. Otherwise, who am I, right? Um, and that's your first challenge when you're advocating for yourself or others. Who are you? Why should people listen? It's really cool that you're already affiliated with this organization because you can say, I'm a member of Spina Bifida Association of the Carolinas. That's pretty cool. People then automatically say, okay, you're not just talking for yourself, you're talking for other people with your disease in a region. You might even say, yeah, we're we have like 20,000 members, or maybe it's 12, whatever the number is. You can say, yeah, we're a 20,000 person organization. I've been a member for the last 4 years. I attended a conference. Um, I have the good fortune of having a doctor who actually specializes in my condition. So I can tell you my experiences, but I can tell you the experiences of other people in my community also. And that's very powerful. If I hear that from somebody, I'm going to pay more attention because I know that I'm getting really good information that is much more likely to be accurate, honest, and reliable. Excuse me. And it's also good to tell a little bit about your background. I have a family and I represent my family in everything I do. So I have to be an honorable person. Otherwise, I bring shame upon my family. And if you believe in those principles of honor, it's good to say, hey, I'm a, I'm a dad or a parent, or I've been married for 20 years and I've gone through all of these challenges with my family. So that's saying like there are stakes in this for you. And you've spent the time talking with other people that you love and who love you back about what it's like to live with this condition. So by establishing your self-authority, your ethos, people will be more likely to listen to you. So that's number one. Any questions about how to do that without sounding like a snob? Or, okay. I'm guaranteed that at least twice, probably three times in this talk, I'm going to mention that I went to Columbia University because I think it makes me sound smart. Fortunately, I was smart before I met them. Sorry. Just having a little joke there. The second thing you need to do after you've established that you're someone worth listening to is you have to hook the person that you're talking to in to what you have to say. Depending on what you know about your audience, and your audience could be one person, a group of people, your congressional representative, the president, whomever, um, your priest, your congregation, your faith family. It could be anyone. Depending on what you know about them, you have to begin with an argument that's going to keep them engaged in what you have to say. And how do you do that? Well, if I know that I'm talking to a group of really nerdy mathematicians, I'm probably going to start with a good logical argument from my point of view. I could say things like, in order to be categorized as a rare disease, the FDA says you have to have fewer than 200,000 Americans with that disease in order to be considered rare. However, there are over 10,000 rare diseases that have been registered in this country. And therefore, when you look at the number of people with rare disease, we're talking about 70 to 100 million people living with a rare disease. So, okay, maybe if you like numbers, you've heard something in there that you want to connect to. All right. If I want to carry through the authoritative speaker shtick, then I might say, according to NORD, the National Organization of Rare Disorders, there are how many millions of people with rare disease in this country? Because once again, that establishes your authority and you've given someone a fact that they can share with another person. Most advocacy is successful when you start getting other people to talk about what you're advocating for. And part of that is giving them a little something that they can take and talk to a colleague about. I don't know how old everyone is here, but I remember during one of the presidential campaigns, I forget whose it was, there was this Joe the plumber, right? And they were using Joe the plumber as this average American um, who the average American could relate to. Let's look at the trials and tribulations of Joe the plumber. Well, you're kind of Joe the plumber when you're advocating. You want to give people an emotional story that they can relate to. Because if you can do that successfully, they're very likely to go share that story with someone else. And again, that's how that chain works. It increases the circulation of your message. And that's something that's really key to advocacy. So again, if we're looking at this in a letter format, we're saying the first paragraph is establish authority. The second and third paragraphs are make a logical argument and make an emotional argument. And depending on what you know about your listener, you might put the emotional one first. You might put the logical one first. And the easy way to remember this, your logical argument is very likely to be stats, numbers, figures, whereas your emotional argument is going to be something that the average American can relate to as far as victory and defeat. Um, I got myself into a bit of trouble for a while because I wrote an example letter of what an advocacy letter could look like. And I didn't want to actually air all of my personal facts to the world, so I created a story. And everyone who read it thought it was my story. And so people would come up to me and they're like, I'm so sorry that you went through all this. I kind of eventually had to admit, it may have hurt my credibility a bit, but I had to admit that I had made it up for the purposes of learning. Right? Um, so don't do that. You've had enough real life drama. You don't have to make anything up. Um, but stay true to your experiences. Pull the emotional threads, those golden threads that come out of your experiences, that golden thread that can connect you to another person. So if you were talking about, let's say, step therapy, does everybody here know what step therapy is? I'll give you a quick. So step therapy is when your doctor says you need prescription A, but your insurance company says that's too expensive. Let's start you with prescription C instead. See if that works. And then 6 months later, oh, it didn't work. All right, let's try prescription B. A little more expensive, but it's not as expensive as that thing your doctor thinks you need. And that doesn't work. And you eventually get to prescription A, and maybe they approve it, maybe they don't. I don't really want to talk about how much I dislike the insurance industry. Um, so if that's what step therapy is, how do you convey how step therapy has impacted your life? Well, in this mock example that I used, I talked about my son who developed a chronic illness, and he and his doctor decided on a medication that was going to make him feel better. It's going to improve his quality of life, but he couldn't access it. And as a result, in the first 6 months, while he was trying some other medication that the insurance thought was the right thing for him, he got sicker. And he ended up going from full-time work to part-time because he needed more time to just care for his own wellness. And then 6 months after that, when he still didn't have the medication that he needed, he just had the one that was slightly less expensive, his health continued to decline. And he ended up getting a divorce because there was a lot of stress and tension in the family, and it kind of broke the relationship apart, which if that's happened to any of you here, I'm very sorry. One thing I have learned from talking with rare disease patients is when a chronic illness visits your life, it changes all the expectations in your life. And if you're fortunate enough to have a partner who's going to stick with you through it, you're very lucky because a lot of people don't. When all the expectations for your future change, sometimes the impulse is to run away. And so that's why I used that as an example in that story. And the appeal that I was making in the legislative letter that I was writing was that in the end, my son had to stop work entirely. He was terribly depressed after his family broke up. And as a result, he ended up on Social Security disability because he was no longer able to work. And maybe all of that happened just because he couldn't get access to the treatment he needed when he needed it. I felt that that was a fairly compelling emotional argument. It was a human story that other people could relate to. Think about those things in your life when you're thinking about advocating for something. Think about how it's really changed your life's trajectory. Maybe you wanted to be a painter, but you just can't, your body just can't do that kind of work anymore. Talk about those things because we all have those things that make us feel like we've experienced loss. And that's a really strong way to make a connection with another person. Because then it's not about politics. It's not about what party you're in. It's about your experience in this world. We've all had hard times. And if there's any humanity in the person that you're communicating to, they will be able to relate to your loss, to your sacrifice. So don't be afraid to use it. Now, that having been said, I've seen a lot of people get up and advocate for themselves and tell that human story, get very emotional. And I have to say, it does not always help your argument. Um, One time when I was in DC, a different year, um, we had somebody new who hadn't really advocated before. We wanted to give them a shot, you know. They have every right to be heard, just like anybody else. Um, that as he began to tell his story, began to tear up, and his throat began to crack, and he veered off from making an emotional connection to making too much of an emotional scene. And it made people uncomfortable. It made me uncomfortable, I'll be honest. And if I was uncomfortable, it must have made the congressional office representatives uncomfortable. If that's the case, you may have lost your narrative. You may have lost your point. So to that, I say, once again, practice your advocacy so that you can have your emotions under control when you need to, but still be human so that you can tap into them when you need them. It's all about control, and that control comes through practice. Um, let's talk a little bit more about self. Oh no, we have one more paragraph to go. Sorry. In our 4-paragraph letter or 4-point argument. The closing of your argument is what a marketing person would call the call to action. I didn't like this term at first, but it really kind of sums up what you're trying to accomplish. The call to action is like that old late night commercial with the Sarah McLachlan song about the sad animals. And yeah, I know you all remember it. It was very touching. Um, and the call to action in that commercial was give money to support I don't remember what the agency was, but give money to support this so that animals don't have to live like this. That was the call to action for that argument. Your advocacy should always have a call to action. Another way of saying this is you need to tell the person you're advocating to what they can do next to get you what you need or prevent this problem from becoming worse and so on. Now, if you watch a documentary about the ingredients in fast food, and by the end of it, you're really upset, and the credits roll, and that's just it. It feels very empty and unsatisfying. You need to have something there to tell people to do. You can go to this website to learn more, or talk to your family about drugs. Any campaign, anything you advocate for needs to have a direction that you can give your listener to take when you're done. Because that's what all of your arguments are for. You're making this emotional argument, you're making a logical argument, you're making you're laying out your authority so that people will listen to you because you want them to carry out a certain action when you're done. So if you think about those four parts, introduction, emotional argument, logical argument, and call to action, those are the building blocks of any argument. And advocacy is an argument. See things from my point of view. Okay. I think I'm going to stop here because I've been talking nonstop for, gosh, 45 minutes. And that's usually, I take that as a sign to shut up for a minute. So I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to give the floor back to the rest of you to do with what you like. If you have questions, comments, anything, I'm very happy to respond to them.
Well, Jim, thank you so, so much. And it's been great. Thank you so, so much. Does anyone have any questions or comments that they'd like to talk about or ask Jim?
I have a question, Jim.
Oh, yeah, Danielle.
So when you're talking about like your legislative, representatives and getting to know them to be able to, form a connection, but typically it's a staffer that you meet, so you're technically not talking to the congressperson. How, do you think we should still kind of just go with that, or like how do we, because I can't really look up the staffer.
That's true. You can't. And you're absolutely right. The vast majority of meetings that end up happening in Washington, D.C. are not with the senator or the congressperson. They're with their staff. And that might seem like a disadvantage, but actually it's the opposite. I think the staffers are better educated on the issues, and so you can have a more robust conversation with them. But as far as learning a little bit about your legislator before going into that meeting, it's okay to say, and I'm aware that Congressman Williams comes from a strong military background, and so do I. And I think he and I would see eye to eye on this because so and so and so. So because those staffers are still representatives of the politician, the lawmaker, you can still use those arguments. If you happen to be a very good sleuth and you can find out something about the congressional staff, oof, well then you've got an extra tool in your toolbox that you can use.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Sure.
So, Jim, as you may or may not know, we at the SBA, we have Teal on the Hill, which is our annual advocacy events. And, I've been able to help help people prep and everything. And I was just wanting to know if you had any other tips or tricks, kind of like the day of, or talk about what you should do, let's say after you've had your meetings. Should you send them a thank you note, or should you try to establish regular contact through that point? Basically, explain what you should do after that meeting.
Okay. I think it's very important that You don't just leave the office and no one ever hears of you again, because you're losing an opportunity to build a relationship with the lawmaker. Um, this is not my experience, but I know several seasoned advocates who kind of get asked questions by their congressional representatives sometimes because they've already proven that they're very knowledgeable, that they know about the experiences of people in the voting district, right? Every lawmaker needs someone to bounce ideas off of. Now, their staff might be their first go-to, but that staff needs to talk to the people. They need to really understand. So leaving a card with them is a good idea. Following up with an email or a phone call or a written letter, if you're old school like me. It's a way of making sure that you don't disappear from their mind when you leave their office. It's also very good to have what they call a leave behind. It could be a couple of printed papers, sheets of paper that summarize the argument that you were making. Um, if if as an organization, if you could, make them slightly colorful or something so that they're more memorable, um, that can be a really strong follow through because they're going to remember the organization. They might remember the points that you were making. And then a week later, when you follow up with an email or phone call or letter, they're starting to feel a continuity. This person wasn't just here once to make some noise. They want to be a part of the solution, part of the conversation. And that's the importance. That was a very good point, Will. That's the importance of being able to follow up afterwards because it keeps the conversation alive.
Good, good, great. Well, we actually have a question from the chat that I got. Would you share a positive experience where you felt prepared and you were able to make a positive impact or made a lasting ally, and what you think made the difference other than that you were already well prepared or on the same side of the issue?
Yeah. I've had a couple of really great experiences over the years, giving talks and things like that. Um, two or 3 years ago, I was giving a talk at a national conference of myasthenia gravis patients. I wasn't there the whole day, so I didn't know what was going on in the room, but people were in a foul mood. Um, Somebody probably said something to upset them, but it didn't help that it was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon and people were tired and starting to get sleepy after lunch. So I did something that I almost always regret, but it tends to leave an impression. I opened with jokes. I did like three really bad dad jokes. I'll share one of them just so you get a little flavor. Um, what's the reason why we never know if a pterodactyl is going to the bathroom? It's because the P is silent. Yeah, I got a little bit of that. And so it kind of woke the room up a little bit. Right. Even a bad joke, when you look a little silly, it might be enough. People might give you a little pity attention. Um, but after that, what I did, and I think this is a good principle of advocacy, especially when you're in person speaking to someone, I increased the volume of my voice. I took more pauses in between my statements to give people a chance to digest or even interrupt the question. Hey, I got a question here. And I also didn't move around a lot. But when I was first, you know, uh, representing my case in front of other people, I was nervous. So I had nervous energy. And I walked back and forth. Hey, did you know, like I'm doing like stand-up comedy routine. I'm moving back and forth. And like halfway through the talk, I'm winded. So it breaks the flow. Better to stay kind of still. Some hand gestures are nice. Um, Eye contact is really important. I think that I could successfully communicate with almost anybody if we could stop, make some eye contact, a little bit of connection, some movement so you know I'm still awake. And it's always good to smile because it makes people feel good. And if you can tell a bad joke along the way, you might just get some pity or some laughs. That's a really good way to break the ice and breach that distance between you and who you're talking to. Dennis, I saw you come off mute. I don't want to miss you this time.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is all very good information. So appreciate that.
thanks.
My question is kind of sort of the opposite of Donna's question,
Hmm.
but I'm wondering, so you laid out your arguments and you told an emotional story, but you were well prepared, and you laid out some logical arguments as well.
Mhm.
And you just feel like maybe stonewalled is too strong of a word, but you don't, but you just feel like you're not moving the needle, right? What strategies would you employ in that case?
Yeah. This depends a lot on how much confidence you have going into it, because someone like myself, I might actually call people out on them not seeming to pay attention. I said, I'm telling you a story about how people's lives are being destroyed by this issue, and I'm getting nothing. Let's focus here, people. Um, I don't like doing that, but sometimes you really need to shake things up. Make or drop a book on the floor, make a loud noise, get people to pay attention. Um, they may end up not paying attention to you, but the very least they could do is give you their undivided attention. At least play along like they're listening. It's respectful. So if you've got the cojones to do it, call them out.
Yeah.
Make some noise. Say, hey, this isn't right.
Mm.
You are a representative of the people here, and I'm the people, and I'm talking to you, and I'm not getting a lot. And if I did that, my Bronx accent would start to come out, and
My Queensland would.
yeah, yeah. You see, we New Yorkers know how to use our accents strategically, but that's one way to approach that kind of problem. But to be honest, Dennis, you know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Mhm.
Sometimes you're just not going to get anything back, and that's unfortunate. Um, what do you do in a case like that? You try again. You just keep trying. Advocacy is sort of like banging your head against the wall until the wall breaks. Hopefully your head is intact by the time that happens, but you gotta really stick to it. It's frustrating. It's a lot of losses, but tiny gains keep you charged up to keep going. And that's another reason why it's good to do this in a group. Have a community of people that you advocate with so that they can share their victories with you and you with them so you can keep each other motivated. Really important.
That's great. Thank you.
Of course.
I have one more question,
Oh,
actually.
yeah.
Um, I just okay. This was the point because I lost my train of thought, and that's the point. So when you go into meetings, I know like
Mhm.
on the computer virtually, it's easier to have like a script by you, and then you can like know, not forget. But like I get really bad brain fog like right now.
Oh,
And or like if physically you're just so fatigued when you're in person and you can't think, like what do you suggest? I mean, I know reading off a script is probably not like the best idea, but like what are some tips for that?
yeah. So you're right. Reading a pre-written statement is about as boring as you can get. I mean, unless you happen to be a dramatic reader. Um, but even still, people feel like they're not engaging with you in the moment. They're engaging with you from the past when you wrote that thing. And that kind of loses the magic of an in-person conversation. But what you can do and completely get away with, and no one would even bat an eyelash, is bring some index cards with your points on them. All right. And you can go through those cards. You know, I wanted to talk to you first about step therapy. And you don't write out what you were going to say. It's just a reminder you wanted to talk about step theory. It's something you can probably do in your sleep anyway. And that's what the practice part comes in, right? So that you know kind of what you want to say and how you want to say it. You're just using the cards to remind you the order or the specific topics if you get distracted. You know, some folks, they get a little shy or nervous in front of a bunch of suits who come walking into the room. Hey, I seen that guy on TV. He's a jackass, but I got to talk to him. Um, sorry, a little too much truth there. Sorry. Um, but people freeze up. It happens. I've seen it happen plenty of times. It's happened to me too. Um, so anything that you can do to keep yourself moving along without becoming robotic. And the index cards or flashcards, that's a great way to do it. My secret, don't tell anybody, is that I keep my loving wife, the first time I had to go give a big talk, she bought me a little like heart that opened up and it had a tiny little angel in it. So cute. She's so great. And so I took that, I keep it with me all the time. When I'm giving a talk, it's always in my pocket. And so if I feel like I'm losing the narrative or I'm starting to freak out a little bit, I put my hand in my pocket and I touch my special token. And it reminds me why I'm here, what I'm fighting for, helps me cool down. It's better to take 10 seconds. 10 seconds is a long time when you're looking at a room full of people. But take that 10 seconds if you need it to get you back on track. That's my best advice for something like that. And if you're having brain fog, maybe say I'm having some brain fog, which is a common issue with people with my condition. I sure hope you can help us get around that by approving this legislation, dude. You know, you can sew everything into your argument. Okay.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, sure. You can't use my token. You have to get your own. Sorry.
Okay, I think I could find something.
Okay. Anybody else? And if not, that's okay. You can reach me anytime. You can find me easily on social media. I'm on LinkedIn, Jim Sliney Jr., and I love talking to folks about things. So reach out anytime, never hesitate.